Let me know when you're all ready. All set? So good evening. I'm here to provide an update on the officer-involved shooting that occurred this afternoon on Franklin Street. Before we start, I want to remind everybody that the information that I'm about to provide is preliminary and subject to change, as this incident occurred only a few hours ago. And also, before I get started, this is a picture of the knife that I'll be talking about during the incident itself. That is not to scale. That is there for display purposes. The knife itself, the blade is approximately 4 inches in length. The overall length of the weapon is somewhere around 8 or 9 inches. So I've had an opportunity to be briefed on the incident, and I've also had an opportunity to review the body-worn camera of the officers at the scene. Here is what I know right now. At approximately 11:30 a.m. this morning, patrol officers were dispatched to a home on the 100 block of Franklin Street, just north of 4th Avenue, for a domestic-related incident. Information at the time of the call was that a man and woman were having an altercation inside of the apartment. The male half of the incident was eventually taken outside of the apartment, where officers continued to speak with him and assist him in getting some of his belongings so that he could go to another address. Upon further investigation, officers at the scene discovered that the male half had an active arrest warrant out of the city of Albany for criminal obstruction of breathing. This warrant was issued on March 18, 2022, and was in reference to a domestic incident in which he grabbed a woman by the neck and squeezed. The March incident was at a different location in the city of Albany and did not involve the same woman that reported the incident today on Franklin Street. While out in front of the address today on Franklin Street, the officers speaking with the man explained to him that he had an active arrest warrant out of the city of Albany and he would have to come down to the South Station to clear up the warrant. While attempting to take the suspect into custody for the warrant, the suspect removed a knife that was secreted in his pocket and stabbed one of the officers in the upper arm area, causing serious injury involving a significant loss of blood. As the suspect continued with his armed aggression against the officer, another officer shot the suspect once in the upper chest area. Even after being shot, the suspect again swung wildly at the officer's head area with the knife, narrowly missing the officer's head. The officer who fired the shot then held the suspect at gunpoint and de-escalated the situation until the knife could be removed from the suspect's hand. The officers at the scene then administered first aid to the suspect. Again, only one shot was fired during this incident, and again, this is the knife that was recovered. The injured officer applied a tourniquet to his arm with the assistance of other personnel at the scene and was transported to Albany Medical Center Hospital, where he is listed in stable condition. The suspect was eventually taken into custody and transported to Albany Medical Center with non-life-threatening injuries. His condition is stable. The suspect, whose name is not being released at this time, is a 54-year-old man who is known to law enforcement. The suspect has over 15 felony arrests and has been convicted on several felonies and misdemeanors. He was also just released from New York State parole last year. While our investigation is still in the early stages, I anticipate that the suspect will be charged. It is important for the public to know that 4 separate and distinct entities will be reviewing the facts of this case: the New York State Attorney General's Office, the Albany County District Attorney's Office, the Albany Police Department, and the Albany Community Police Review Board. What I witnessed was an amazing display of professionalism, courage, and empathy by Albany police officers. And I want to be very clear about the sequence of events with this incident. The officers attempted to place a suspect under arrest for an open and valid warrant out of the city of Albany. The suspect then pulled out a knife and viciously stabbed one of the officers. A different officer shot the suspect in order to stop the assault. And even after being shot, the suspect attempted to stab the first officer again. The officer who fired the shot used an extraordinary amount of restraint, and his de-escalation techniques were textbook. Even after an officer was viciously attacked, officers on the scene administered first aid to the suspect as soon as it was safe to do so. I plan to release body-worn camera footage of this incident within the next couple of days, and I'm available to take any questions that you may have.
Chief, can you talk a little bit about the nature of the prior convictions and charges?
I don't have anything other than what I mentioned, and what I mentioned with respect to his prior history was that he has 15 felony arrests. He's been convicted on several felonies and misdemeanors. I don't know the exact charges that are involved here.
In terms of like the altercation, was there any other weapons drawn before the gun was drawn, maybe tasing him or something like that?
No, and it's important for the public to know that there was no time for any other sort of weapon to be used in this case. We had an officer who had been viciously attacked. An officer who was subject to lethal force. And let's be very clear about what this was. This suspect used lethal or deadly force against this officer. And the other officer, another officer who was at the scene, used lethal force in order to stop that threat against that other officer. The officer, again, that was stabbed, sustained some very serious wounds. And again, this person on two occasions during this incident attempted to stab, in fact, stabbed the officer the one time, and the second time attempted to stab the officer in the head area. So there's no question whatsoever that this was a lethal or a deadly force situation, and the officers used the commensurate level of force in order to stop that threat. But it's also important for the public to know that once the threat subsided, and once there was no longer that sort of threat, the officer that fired that first shot used textbook de-escalation techniques. Understood that the threat had subsided and de-escalated it to a point where no other shots were fired, and we were able to take that person into custody and give that person first aid to minimize any injuries that that person sustained at the scene.
How is the officer doing right now?
Officer he's in stable condition right now, and obviously quite shook up. Other officers who were involved with the incident, including the officer who fired this shot, they're all shook up. You know, none of these officers want to get involved in lethal or deadly force situations. In fact, none of the officers, when they go out to start their shifts, they don't want to get involved in any situations that involve force. And this was a situation where the officer, before the suspect took out that knife, the officer was attempting to de-escalate that situation, was attempting to calm and soothe this person. Person, you know, he appeared somewhat agitated, and the officers were doing what they could to try to bring that person down. And there just was not enough time for any other sort of intervention once that person viciously stabbed that officer and attempted to viciously stab the officer a second time. So I'm comfortable with the response from these officers. In fact, you know, I've seen and I've reviewed many instances of lethal force situations throughout my 30-plus year career. And this was one of the situations that I was most impressed with how these officers handled this.
What will happen to the two officers going forward?
So the officer that fired the weapon, that officer, per department policy, will be placed on administrative leave while we review this case. The other officer is you know, getting medical attention at this point, and the status of that officer is unknown at this point. But again, these officers were operating under some extremely stressful circumstances. Um, you know, none of these officers expected this man to pull out a knife and attempt to kill them for a warrant. I mean, this was a routine arrest. The officers clearly stated to this person that you have an arrest, we're going to take you into custody so that we can clear this arrest up. That's it. And then they attempted to effect the arrest. And person pulls out this knife and attempts to actually, in fact, viciously stabs an officer. I mean, it's, you know, there's just no way to explain this. You know, we see a lot in our profession. We see it on a daily basis. These officers are going through a lot, and nobody expects to get stabbed when they're just doing conducting routine actions out in the street.
So you say you were comfortable with their action. Do you think this was the best course of action given the incident?
Yes, I think that when you put officers in situations, because let's remember, we're talking about human beings here. We're talking about human beings who are among the best trained in their profession. These officers get some of the best training in de-escalation, the best training in how to use alternate forms of weapons or tools in order to accomplish what needs to be done. And yet, they're put into a situation where they're effecting a routine arrest, and a person stabs them. Absolutely. Under those circumstances, those officers perform admirably to me. I mean, this was some amazing piece of police work. And to handle this situation where only one shot was fired. And let's be frank here. I mean, there are many places across this country where, given the same sort of facts and circumstances, we may see 5 or 6 shots. And that doesn't mean that if some other place doesn't and they have more shots fired than we did, that it was wrong. It just means that it shows that these officers were consciously aware of other ways of resolving this incident. One way, again, would have been to simply keep firing until that person went down. These officers, especially that one officer who was the contact officer who actually fired the shot, was so consciously aware during such an emotional event, and had the awareness to know that this situation has subsided. Yes, further lethal force may be justified, but there's another way of handling this. So I hope that answered your question, because you know, it shows that they were consciously thinking about other ways of resolving this. Yes, sir.
In a situation like this where officers are trying to separate two parties that are in a dispute, is it standard procedure to run names for warrants and that sort of thing?
Yes. Yes.
And can you give us any more details on the officers involved, how long they've been on the force, their names?
I don't have the name. Well, I have the names, but we're not going to release the names at this point. And I'll have the public information officer give you the years of service that the officers had that were involved.
In terms of the community, you know, we've had another reporter out there. She was talking to the community. They're upset about this, obviously. Some of them, they don't really believe the situation that happened. Do you think this hurts the trust that you're trying to build back with the community over the past couple of years?
I don't think it hurts trust when an officer gets viciously attacked and uses the appropriate amount of force in order to prevent either more damage to the officer. I don't think that damages are in any relationships with the community. I think what we can do is to make sure that the community knows exactly what happened. I think that helps, and that's one of the reasons why I will be releasing the body-worn video of this incident within the next couple of days.
Is this the best way, you think, to address or calm the tension?
I think so. I think this is a way. I mean, you know, we do a lot of things before incidents like this happen in order to, you know, build these relationships with our community. And one of the things that we do is, you know, we have these relationships with our Community Police Review Board and our Albany Community Police Advisory Committee, ACPAC, and in other organizations, our faith-based community in our city, other nonprofits. So we establish these relationships even before an incident like this happened. so that we can give information out to some of those trusted partners that we have in the community, partners that are trusted by others in the community. But, again, I want to make it very clear that, that officer had no choice. Well, I take it back. He did have a choice. He could have let his fellow officer get viciously stabbed or continued to be viciously stabbed by this person, potentially killed by this person. That was one choice. But that's not a choice that officers should have to make. And as far as I'm concerned, that officer made the appropriate decision. We had an officer who was viciously attacked. The person was continuing that attack. This person obviously had intent to do major bodily damage or to kill that officer. And that officer's partner used lethal force in order to stop a lethal force threat. Once that threat subsided, that officer did not use any other lethal force.
Chief, I might have missed this. Have formal charges been filed against the man?
Not yet.
You mentioned that there's going to be a number of different investigations. Do you know what the timeline is going to be for any of those?
The State Attorney General's office is usually pretty quick because their assessment is fairly narrow. But the others, there's really no timeline. Sometimes it takes a while for the district attorney's office to kind of parse their way through the facts, and obviously, we have our own internal investigation that covers a wide range of things, and then we're just not sure with the Albany Community Police Review Board, because we want to make sure that they all get the information that they need as thorough as possible, and we want to give them as much time as they can to have a thorough review of this.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.